All right, so 5/8 compared with 7/12. So our first step is to get a common denominator. Step 1, common denominator. How do I do that?
You have to multiply it.
What do I multiply?
The denominator.
The denominator. So what am I going to multiply?
8.
The numbers down on the bottom are our denominator. So I'm going to multiply 8 times 12 is 96. So our new denominator is going to be 96. We're going to make equivalent fractions with a denominator of 96. So I'm going to make a fraction that's equivalent to 5/8 with a denominator of 96. And I'm going to make a fraction equivalent to 7/12 that has a denominator of 96. Now my next step is to figure out what my numerator is going to be. I'm going to make equivalent fractions using 96. So I'm going to ask myself, how can I get from 8 to 96? Is it getting bigger or smaller? Bigger, so I know I need to multiply. 8 times what makes 96? 12. And the answer to that's right here, because you know you multiplied the other denominator times 8 to get my new denominator, right? So then if I multiply the bottom times 12, I'm going to multiply the top times 12. Whatever I do to the denominator, I got to do to the numerator. So if I multiply 8 times 12, then I'm going to multiply 5 times 12. What's 5 times 12? 60. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. I've got to figure out how I can get from 12 to 96. Is it getting larger or smaller?
Larger.
So I know I need to multiply, and then I need to think 12 times what makes 96?
8.
Yeah, and the answer is right here, because we already know we multiplied this denominator times this denominator. So 12 times 8 is 96. And if you multiply the denominator times 8, what do you do to the numerator?
You have to do the numerator times 8.
Good. These are getting proportionally bigger. That means this one gets bigger at the same rate that this one gets bigger. So like if the bottom number doubles, then the top number doubles. If the bottom number triples, then the top number is going to triple. So if the bottom number multiplies by 8, the top number is going to multiply by 8. And 7 times 8 is 56. So we just did step 2. We made the equivalent fractions. And then what is step 3? Very good. Compare the numerator. So I'm going to compare 60 and 56 because we have equal number of parts to make the whole. So all I have to do is compare my numerators. What's larger, 60 or 56? 60 is larger, so this fraction is larger and this one is smaller. The larger one gets 2 dots, the smaller one gets 1 dot. Or you can just think 5/8 is greater than 7/12. Remember the symbol that looks like the L that's been leaned on? L for left, L for less than. Okay? 5/8 is greater than 7/12. Let's look at another one. 2/5 compared with 3/8. We're going to compare the two fractions, 2/5 and 3/8. What is my first step? I'm going to get a common denominator by multiplying. Good. What is 5 times 8? 5 times 8 is 40. So my new denominator is going to be 40. So I'm going to make equivalent fractions with the common denominator of 40. Good. Now I can multiply to find my new numerator and denominator. We already have the denominator is 40. How did we get from 5 to 40?
You multiply it by 8.
We multiplied it by 8. If I multiply the denominator by 8, 8 times 5 is 40, then I'm going to do 8 times to get my numerator. What's 8 times 2? 16. Then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to say, how did I get from 8 to 40? I did 5 times 8 to get 40. So if I multiply the denominator times 5, what am I going to do to the top? I'm going to multiply 5 times the numerator. And what is 3 times 5?
15.
So I did step 2. I made equivalent fractions. And then step 3 is to compare your numerators. What's larger, 15 or 16 or 15? 16 is larger. So 2/5 is greater than 3/8. Yes, sir.
Okay, never mind.
3/5 compared with 6/9. 3/5 compared with 6/9. What's my first step? Good. I'm going to multiply my denominators together to get a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply 5 times 9, which is... So I'm going to make equivalent fractions with my new denominator. Okay, now I have to make an equivalent fraction using 45 for each of these. So I'm going to ask myself, how did I get from 5 to 45? Times 9. Good. And if I multiply the bottom times 9, what do I do to the top? Good. I multiplied 9 times 5 to get 45, so I'm going to multiply 9 times 3 to get my numerator. What's 9 times 3? Do the same thing on the other side. How do you get from 9 to 45? 5 times 9 makes 45. So if I multiply my denominator times 5, what am I going to do with the numerator? Times 5. So I multiplied 5 times 9 to get 45. And I'm going to multiply 5 times 6 to get my numerator, which is... Now you can have the common denominator so you can compare your numerators. What's larger, 3/5 or 6/9? 6/9 is larger. 3/5 is smaller. Connect your dots. You don't have to make the dots. That's just another strategy. All right, so this is where you make an equivalent fraction with the denominator where you multiplied your old denominators together. I'm going to show you another trick that works sometimes. It doesn't always work. All right, let's look at these. 1/4 compared with 5/8. Okay, let's just do some exploring first and talk about these. So let's look at 1/4. Let's look at the denominator 4. What is half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. So would 1/4 be more than half of a pizza or less than half of a pizza? That would be less than a half. So I'm going to write less than 1/2 up here. And 5/8. What's half of 8?
4.
Half of 8 is 4. So would 5/8 be more than half of a pizza or less than half of a pizza? 5 out of 8 is more than 4 out of 8, so it's more than 1/2. Well, if I know that this one is smaller than half and this one's bigger than half, can I tell which one of these fractions is bigger and smaller? Yes. Which one is bigger? 5/8 is bigger. Why?
Because it's more than 1/2.
Because it's more than 1/2. Good. That is a strategy that you can use sometimes. If you can tell that one's smaller than a half and one's bigger than a half, you can use this strategy. But if they're both less than a half, it's not going to help you. And if they're both more than a half, it's not going to help you. Okay? But if you can tell that one's smaller than half and one's bigger than half, then you can use that to help you find out which one's greater than and less than. Okay? I'm going to show you another strategy. Same kind of thing. It doesn't work all the time. Now, you could still do this strategy. You could still multiply 8 times 4 and get 32 and make equivalent fractions. You could still do that, but you don't have to. Okay? I just wanted to show you that. Let me show you the other trick. I know. It's pretty cool, huh? So let's say that I have 3/4 and 2/8. Okay, now you can use the half strategy on this, but I'm going to show you a different strategy that you can use also. You can also use the making an equivalent fraction strategy. We got to go real quick. It's time to go. So how does 4 compare with 8? 4 is half of 8, so I can take 4 and do what? Just hang on. How could I get from 4 to 8? I can multiply 4 times 2 and get 8, right? So if you can multiply the bottom times 2, then you multiply the top times 2. And 3 times 2 is... Now I can compare 6/8 and 2/8. So you only had to make an equivalent fraction on this side. Which one's larger?
3/4.
3/4 is larger. So 3/4 is greater than 2/8. So that's just another strategy. The first strategy always works, but these work sometimes. Great tools to have.